what is it?
I'm the Doctor.
So what is it?
I'm the Doctor.
So what is it? I'm the Doctor. Only joking.
I'm the Doctor.
So what is it?
I'm the Doctor.
So what is it?
I'm the Doctor.
Only joking.
I'm the Doctor.
So what is it?
Small off-duty Czechoslovakian traffic warden.
So what is it?
I'm the Doctor.
Only joking.
I'm the Doctor.
So what is it?
I'm the Doctor.
Alright, dudes, it's time for another episode of It's Time to Rewind. I am known as Bubbawheat. Not the Bubbawheat, not first name Bubba, last name Wheat, just Bubbawheat. This season is Red Who, where I'm covering British sci-fi like Red Dwarf and Doctor Who, and joining me once again, 3 million years in the future via the TARDIS, is my guest Lackey. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Just pretend I'm doing a really bad Elvis impersonation here.
Yeah, and this week we are talking about Revelation of the Daleks, which was the 6th and final serial of the 22nd season of classic Doctor Who, featuring the Sixth Doctor Colin Baker. It originally aired in 2 weekly parts starting on March 23rd, 1985. Although I noticed whenever I was streaming it on Tubi, they present it in the syndicated version where they split it into 4 episodes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the season 22, for whatever reason, up till season 22, Doctor Who generally ran in seasons of a season was 26 episodes long, and episodes were about 25 minutes apiece. For some reason that I don't think I've ever been clear on, for season 22, they doubled the episode length. So these are like 45 to 50-minute episodes, and then truncated the actual episode order to 13. So there's as much material in season 22 as there had been in previous seasons in the 70s. But it because of the 50 episode length, because of the 50 minute time length, they were kind of written differently. They didn't have the middle I never said hangover, the middle cliffhanger. This was not a very popular way. This did not go over very well. So with season 23, they reverted to 25-minute episodes. In America, they split most of season 22's episodes in half. So the way you saw them on Tubi, because most American PBS stations ran them in 25 or 30-minute time slots.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I also think it's interesting that that so far there's been pretty big gaps in my coverage going through the various Doctors, but this is the first time where I'm basically doing back-to-back season finales, and my last Doctor Who episode was the final one for Peter Davison. And the first with Colin Baker. And this time I actually have a repeat episode with a companion. So I have 2 episodes in a row with Perry, and technically 2 episodes in a row with Colin Baker, but he only appeared for the last 10 seconds of my last episode. So what's your thoughts on Colin Baker as the Sixth Doctor? Because I get the impression that he, other than the Doctors that had, a much shorter run, I get the impression that he's not the favorite of most. He's kind of lower on the spectrum of people's favorite Doctors.
The Colin Baker's Doctor did not go over well in the UK at the time. Colin Baker got a lot of flack for that, but I don't think the problem was with Colin Baker. I think Colin Baker's a really good actor for this type of role. I don't think I've really seen him do anything that is kind of doctory, so I don't know what kind of range he has. But he's generally known for these sort of loud, brash, over-the-top characters. Not quite as loud as Brian Blessed, maybe, who he would act opposite in season 23, but still kind of, like I said, loud, brash, flamboyant, egotistical. That didn't go, but I don't think the problem is his performance. I think the problem is the writing. The writing during Colin Baker's 2 seasons it's just not there. And there's a lot of reasons for that. We're probably going to go into – I'll probably discuss some of the behind-the-scenes drama that was going on at this time when we actually talk about the episode. But the point is Doctor Who was kind of in a state of creative free fall. At the time, there was a lot of tension between the producer, John Nathan Turner, and the script editor or head writer, Eric Sayward, who wrote Revelation of the Daleks. They weren't getting along. They were butting heads. The show's ratings were tanking, a lot of which was because of this new 50-minute format, and I think they'd rescheduled the show. They put it in another time slot where it just wasn't doing as well. And there were a couple of BBC head honchos who were basically making public announcements that basically to the effect of, yeah, we think Doctor Who sucks and we wish we didn't have to produce it. And Colin Baker, I think, ended up taking the brunt of that. I think he's, like I said, I think he's a good actor for this role. And certainly when you get to the so-called wilderness, the later wilderness years, the years between 89 and 2005, where the only televised Doctor Who you had was the TV movie, which is in 96, which is contentious in and of itself. In the late 1990s, Big Finish came in and started producing their audio dramas, and having bagged, the final 3, other than Paul McGann, TV show doctors, Peter Davison, Colin Baker, and Sylvester McCoy. And that really, the Big Finish stuff, it really caused a reassessment of Colin Baker and the Sixth Doctor. And he's a lot more popular now as an actor. He's really, in terms of, the establishment figures within Doctor Who community, he's seen kind of like as a national treasure and goodwill ambassador for the show. And that, like I said, that the Big Finish material really kind of, I think fans still of the classic series still basically accept that the show was not at its best in, between 84 and 86 when Colin Baker was the Doctor. But we really no longer blame Colin Baker. Colin Baker made the best of a really bad situation.
Yeah, and I think I see a lot of that whenever I was watching this episode, because he definitely, the Doctor always seems, he always has a bit of ego to him. He does think that most doctors think that they're smarter than everybody else, but it's usually couched in something else that endears them, whether they're, I don't know, but I can't think of, my head's kind of going through the other doctors, but I feel like there's some, there's some element that helps counterbalance that ego, and
sure.
Colin Baker's Doctor doesn't have that.
The original plan, from what I understand, for the Colin Baker era was supposed to go that Colin Baker's Doctor, the Sixth Doctor, was supposed to start off very kind of abrasive and unlikable, and then there would be Colin Baker has described this as kind of like the development of Mr. Darcy in, I think, Pride and Prejudice, where you would basically learn somewhere there was almost kind of like an arc kind of semi-planned for the original, what was originally going to be his run, where in the original version of season 23, you would have learned that the Sixth Doctor's kind of his abrasiveness was kind of almost like a psychological defense mechanism, because he knew that he had a thing that he was going to do in the future that was going to cause him a lot of guilt. Because the original plan for season 23 was scrapped, and we got the Trial of a Time Lord instead, which ended up being his last season. And it's important to remember that Colin Baker was really the first fan of Doctor Who to really get involved in front of the camera. He was a little bit old to be the target audience when the show started. He was born in 43. The show started in 63, so he was in his 20s. But he was he was a committed fan of the show in the 70s, and kind of coincidentally in his when he was establishing himself as an actor, he was Patrick Trout. One of his roommates was one of Patrick Troughton's sons. So he knew Patrick Troughton personally. But Colin Baker, like when he was originally cast in the Doctor in '84, he actually went to the press and said, "Yeah, I'm going to be the Doctor for longer than Tom Baker was. I'm going to do more than 7 years." And that didn't end up happening, obviously. Because the original plan for season 23 was scrapped, we really don't know what that big secret thing that the Doctor was causing the Doctor's guilt was end up going to be. There is some speculation that he would have ended up, this is going to be very familiar, an idea, destroying Gallifrey. But since those episodes, I think only the season premiere for season 23 was written before it got scrapped and we got the trial instead. We really don't know what John Nathan Turner and Eric Sayward had planned.
That's interesting.
And they might not even have had. This is not a time period of really strict arc development. Even when you get to the Seventh Doctor, you're almost certainly going to, if you're certainly almost going to come across the more than just a Time Lord idea. And that wasn't really planned out either. This was something that was kind of the writers and Colin Baker kind of had the idea behind the scenes that there was going to be an ultimate softening of the Sixth Doctor.
Yeah, that's interesting. I definitely think that could have been an interesting way to go. But yeah, it's clearly they just kind of kept it loosey goosey, and we got what we got. So. I think let's go ahead and jump into the serial itself, the story that we're covering, which is Revelation of the Daleks. And this is interesting. This is one of those things where I feel like I'm not sure if I got it through like cultural osmosis, but either the look or the name or both of Davros in this episode kind of sparked it had a twinge of familiarity for me. Even though I definitely know that I've never seen this episode, but I kind of feel like maybe I've seen this in clips or something along those lines, or just maybe just like it's kind of a little bit of a sci-fi trope, a little bit the kind of talking head in a jar in a way. And I do think that that's interesting, and I also could never fully tell, because Davros is under such heavy makeup and there's like not so much movement. I kept going back and forth wondering if the head in the jar was just an animatronic with a moving mouth, or if they actually put the actor in that situation for the acting.
So my understanding is they actually did put so a little bit of background. Davros was created. Davros' first appearance on the show was a 74 serial called during 74-75. Tom Baker's first season was called Genesis of the Daleks, and it's considered one of the all-time great, Doctor Who serials, written by the creator of the Daleks, Terry Nation. Davros dies at the end of Genesis of the Daleks, but Terry Nation loved the character so much that when he was contracted to do the next Dalek serial in, I think, 78 or 79, which was Destiny of the Daleks, he brought Davros back. And
I did get the impression whenever I was watching this, because they do have references to previous adventures with Davros, and I definitely thought that was a reference to a previous episode and not a previous unfilmed adventure.
Yeah, so Terry Nation's last writing contribution to Doctor Who was, like I said, 1979, but this is something I've mentioned a few times. The BBC, the relationship between the writer, the legal relationship between the writer and the network for the classic series is a bit weird in that, generally speaking, unless they were specifically devised by the production team or bought by the BBC, characters created by the writers were owned by the writers. And monsters created by the writers were owned by the writers. Whenever they do a Dalek story, they had to pay Terry Nation, or now Terry Nation's estate. And in this case, even though Terry Nation wasn't writing Dalek stories anymore, he basically had a stipulation with the BBC: I'm not going to allow you to use the Daleks unless you put Davros in the story. So the previous season had a Dalek story, also written by Eric Sayward, called Resurrection of the Daleks, and some of the stuff when the Sixth Doctor and the Dalek and Davros have these dialogues, that's a reference to what happened in Resurrection. But to get back to the question I was kind of got sidetracked answering, which is the question of how they did the Davros in the jar. My understanding is that the voice, the guy in the Davros mask in this outing was Terry Malloy. And my understanding is that is actually what they had, is they had Terry Malloy actually in there with the mask on, and then under the machinery, the prop, but there wasn't enough room for him to stand up. So my understanding is that he was actually uncomfortably kneeling underneath that whole apparatus, and I assume to do those really quick swivels, when his head swivels around, they had to have him on like a wheeled platform or casters or something that they were radio controlling to spin him around. But that actually is him. But he's, like I said, there's not enough room for him to actually comfortably be seated, so I think he's kneeling.
Yeah, I wonder. I think it's possible. You know, I wasn't watching super closely to see if there was like a cut before and after each of the quick movements, but because there definitely was a fake head at some points, because whenever the head gets shot, then and it deflates, that's definitely a prop head. So I wouldn't be surprised if maybe they did a little editing trickery, and like for the fast movements it was just the fake head, and they would
it might have
back
been.
and forth. It
might have been, but they made these scenes were shot on videotape. In color, generally speaking. This is the last time in Doctor Who, technically, here's an interesting, that you're going to see this. But generally throughout the 70s, the rule of thumb is anything which is an exterior is shot on film and has that kind of grainier feel. Anything that's an interior that's shot on a soundstage or a studio, or like in an interior location, like they're shooting in a palatial estate or something like that, that's on videotape. And videotape at this point, I think videotape is still kind of hard to edit for the BBC. So my operating theory is that is when they're swiveling around, that the actor actually is still in there. But I couldn't tell you that 100%.
Yeah, because I will say that the look of that looks great. I think that the head in a cylinder Davros, and even like in the later in the episode, whenever we get Davros in the bottom half of a Dalek in like the Dalek wheelchair, I guess. Yeah. I think that looks good as well, and that's how the audience was used to seeing Davros, in that Dalek wheelchair buggy thing. Mm-hmm. And I feel like there's a lot of similarities between this episode and the last episode I covered.
Caves of Androzani?
Yeah, Caves of Androzani, because I feel like this also has, a lot of guns, a lot of death, a lot of political intrigue, going on throughout the story.
So, here's some more behind-the-scenes stuff. Now, Robert Holmes was the guy who wrote Caves of Androzani was a guy named Robert Holmes. Robert Holmes is probably, in terms of like a number of episodes having written of Doctor Who, the classic series, I think he had written more episodes of Doctor Who than anybody else. John Nathan Turner, when he took over the show in 80 as producer, he really wanted to get away from people who had contributed to the show before. So a lot of writers, trusted, tried and true writers, once Peter Davison comes along, they're no longer being used. They're no longer being commissioned to write for the show. But when they did the Five Doctors in 83, Eric Sayward wanted Robert Holmes to come back. Eric Sayward had the head writer. He'd kind of studied like previous Doctor Who writers, and he wanted Robert Holmes back. And Robert Holmes did not doing the Five Doctors, but Sayward kept his contact info and did Caves of Androzani. And Caves of Androzani is probably it's considered to be one of the best Doctor Who stories, period. But it's really, Peter Davison went on the record as saying that if more scripts had been like Caves of Androzani, more episodes had been like Caves of Androzani, he wouldn't have left after 3 years. So the hallmarks of Robert Holmes' stories, there's a lot of gallows humor. There's a lot of intrigue. There's a lot of double dealing, people doing things behind the scenes to screw each other over. There's a lot of what's called double acts. He'll write characters in twos to kind of play off of each other. And Eric Sayward took a lot of this to heart when after Caves of Androzani, and then Robert Holmes also contributed the Two Doctors to season 22. So this is very much kind of like Eric Sayward kind of operating in Robert Holmes mode. The guns, and one of the things I specifically wanted to point out is that this is an action-oriented story to the point where even the morticians are wandering around with automatic weapons. This is really an Eric Sayward thing. Eric Sayward has gone on record as saying he sees Doctor Who as an action-adventure show. It is not like there's no guns previously in any other Doctor Who era. Certainly in the Third Doctor era, that's the unit era. That's where the Doctor is working with a military unit. But there's a sort of and the fact that this serial was made in the mid 80s, that it's being made at a time of when things like when Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone are like the predominant action heroes, and I think both Predator and Aliens are in the future. I don't think they've been released yet. I think they're both like 86 or 87 movies. But this is something that's really on Eric Sayward's mind. Eric Sayward's stories tend to have a lot of guns. They tend to have a lot of military and people who are military or people who are paramilitary, people who are freedom fighters, people who think a lot, about shooting lots of people. And this is this is atypical. This is typical of a lot of Sayward stories. Earthshock is like this as well. Earthshock is which he did for Peter Davison, I think in 82, really kind of I give that one a lot of credit because it basically came up with the idea of Aliens, the movie, 4 years before it was actually made. But this is the sort of thing that Sayward is very much kind of reacting to kind of like the action cinema of the time. The action heroes, they're people who they're military or they're paramilitary or they're ex-military. And, so that's why you get so many like automatic weapons. And the other thing that I didn't mention about Robert Holmes, but that Sayward is also well known for doing, is basically killing all the supporting cast. Yeah,
and pretty much in this story, I think the only surviving side characters is like Takis and his his partner.
Yeah, I can't remember. I don't remember all the character names, but yeah, Takis and Trevor. Trevor, I know his first name's Trevor. I don't know, but the taller guy with the beard, and then the shorter guy with the thinning hair. I know the actor's name is Colin Spall. He showed up in the new series too. But we'll get to
Colin
that later
Spall
when
is
we talk
Lilt.
about. Yeah, Lilt. Yeah, Lilt and Takis. They're the only ones that survive.
Mm-hmm. And like literally everybody else dies, and it's It feels like a pretty big cast too, because starting off in the episode, besides the whole bit with the Doctor and Perry, it just kind of wandering around outside trying to find the door to this tranquil repose. They call it a funeral home, but it's kind of like a mix of a funeral home and like a hospice, like a future hospice, because everybody in there supposedly isn't dead. They're just in suspended animation.
Right. Right after watching the story, I read the review of it in the About Time, Volume 6, the Doctor Who episode guide, and then I think I mentioned her the last time I was on. I read Elizabeth Sandifer's essay on Revelation on her site, Eruditorium Press, and both of them posit the idea that the process of watching Revelation of the Daleks to and the audience of the mid 1980s would have been akin to like channel surfing. It's not just that you have all these separate plots going on. You have the Doctor and Perry walking across the surface trying to get into tranquil repose. You have the drama with Jobel and Tassenbeaker and Lilt and Takis, the whole thing with the whole thing with the president coming to visit his wife's body, the whole drama with the morticians. You have the two freedom fighters, Grigory and Natasha, breaking in to see her father. You have the DJ who's completely isolated from everybody else. Alexei Sale just doing, his various patters while you have, distorted music in the background. You've got Davros in the basement with his Daleks doing his thing, and you've got Kara and the secretary off somewhere else, and that's Eleanor Braun from Faulty Towers as Kara. And they're all very different characters. Their stories all eventually tie together, but they're all very different looking characters on very different looking sets doing very different looking things. And I've seen more than one person posit that the stylistic paradigm of Revelation of the Daleks is it's not that all these different sets of characters look like they're on entirely different television shows. And it is worth mentioning that, as the season finale, effectively, Revelation of the Daleks probably had the least amount of money allocated to it in the budget. So a lot of these props are basically taken from other productions or from stock. A lot of the design, et cetera, isn't really bespoke. It's not done specifically for this. It's stuff that was done from other productions and kind of commandeered for this.
Yeah, and I definitely get what you're saying, and it's something that I didn't really think too much about while I was watching it, and I think that's because I tend to enjoy these types of stories where you do have all these, various pockets of individual stories, and then they all kind of weave together at the end, and they crisscross with each other in different ways. And I do think that is kind of what's happening in this story, because we do have, like you said, it's basically like 6 different micro stories that are all kind of intersecting with each other in various ways. Because, we have Kara and her secretary who are, she wants to destroy Davros, and she hires this contract killer who's part of this order, this Knights
of
order.
Oberon.
Yeah. I guess it's kind of like the John Wick assassination organization, where
The
it's
the
this.
sorry. The apparently the model for Orsini and Bostock was actually, Eric Sayward apparently had Don Quixote and Sancho Panza in mind. Although when they're introduced, I honestly can't think of anything other than Blackadder and Baldric, specifically because they talk about Bostock's hygiene problems, and it's just he's so filthy. And it's just like that's just them making fun of the way Bostock smells. That's just pure Blackadder.
Yeah, I do like as soon as you said Don Quixote. Yeah, I definitely I do get that concept because Orsini, he talks about all his his great, like he talks about his greatness, but anytime anyone tries to help, it's like he prefers to rely on things that are old but damaged, so that I get the feeling that way if he fails, then it's not his personal failing, it's the equipment that he had to work with, because he has this mechanical leg. And Kara offers, we have engineers, we can fit. He says, like, he doesn't want to sit down because his leg sticks and sometimes it's hard to get up. And Kara says, oh, we have engineers, we can fix that for you. And he's like, no, I prefer the inconvenience. And a little bit later, he has this, he has his gun. And Bostock's like, here, why don't you take this pistol? Because I know that gun has a history of jamming, and you don't want to be in a position where it jams at the worst possible time. And Orsini just sets the pistol back down. He's like, no, that this is I've had this for ages. This is my gun. I want to. This is part of my honorable kill.
And it's interesting that scene, the pistol scene, comes right on the heels of a dialogue sequence where Orsini explains to Bostock the concept of the sword, and he compares his own personal rifle to this is my sword. It's old, but it's my, this is, part of my identity as an honorable, almost like a knight. Well, obviously knights of Oberon, but this is part of my knightly equipment.
Yeah, it's code.
It's not just there as a weapon. It's part of that knightly identity.
Mm. But on the opposite side of things, I don't think I would have come to Don Quixote on my own, because at the end of the day, he is capable. Like it's not all just bluster, and he doesn't accidentally fall into success. He's not just kind of blustering. It's not like a Mr. Magoo situation where, he thinks he's doing one thing, but he's actually doing another thing, or like some of the old classic cartoons where it's like he trips and ends up killing someone. He is actually capable whenever he does finally get to Davros, and it's just the fact that Davros happens to be one step ahead of him.
Right. In this case, Orsini is, he's not delusional like Don Quixote, but the trope that they use here for Orsini is, this is my last job and then I'm retiring. He wants to go out on like his most honorable kill, to kill the most evil man in the galaxy. And with that, when he's done that, he's going to retire. So obviously, if you've ever watched like a buddy cop movie, the guy who's going to, or a heist movie where the guy who's going to retire after this is done, he's going to die.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then we also have the whole Gregory and Natasha subplot. The two of them that are breaking in, and Natasha is looking for her father, and Gregory is just basically a mercenary that's helping her break in, and they get captured and tortured, but they do eventually find him, and he's just a head, and he's a head that's mutating into a Dalek.
and this is a good kind of vector into one of the things I think is really interesting about this story, which is the fact that this is Doctor Who has the reputation of being a scary show in Britain. The idea, the old cliche of the kids would hide behind the sofa whenever the Daleks, the Cybermen, came on. Doctor Who, in terms of horror content, though, Doctor Who is not often during its run. There are periods when it's more as a story, as a genre, the story genre is horror. But this is season 22 in general, but I think this is the most extreme example. This is another, where I was talking about Sayward kind of being almost in dialogue with the action movies at the time. He's also in dialogue with the horror movies of the time. And there is a lot of body horror in this story. Natasha's father, Arthur Stengus, getting mutated into a Dalek, and also the scene, particularly the scene that I want to call attention to, is the one where he's begging. He's going back and forth. You can tell the Dalek conditioning is starting to take over his mind, because he's starting to rant like a Dalek and scream about extermination and purity. And between that, he's saying, "Kill me," which now this was 85, so I don't know if the actual footage was in circulation at this time, but it was something that people knew about, which is that there had been a scene deleted from the original Alien towards the end, where Ripley sees Dallas, and Ridley Scott and Dan O'Bannon's idea of the alien life cycle, and I know I'm going off on a tangent here, it is very different than what Jim Cameron ended up doing with Aliens, but the idea was that why the various crew members that weren't killed outright were being taken and spirited off and held somewhere is because they were being mutated into the eggs that the facehuggers came out of. So there's this scene where Dallas, Tom Skerritt's character, his head is literally disappearing into one of the alien eggs, and he's begging Ripley to kill him. This was a scene that was cut from the original Alien. It was restored when Ridley Scott did, I think it was the 25th anniversary director's cut. But I knew about that scene because it's in Alan Dean Foster's novelization. That novelization is based on the original script of Alien. So there's stuff in there that in that book that isn't in the film. My dad had that novelization when I was a kid, and I'd actually read it when I was in my early teens, before I'd seen either Alien or Aliens. So when I originally saw this story, and I think it was 85, and I see this whole thing with Stengus being mutated, turning into a Dalek, and begging a woman to kill him, I knew exactly what that was a reference to. I knew exactly. I have to think that Eric Sayward, if that footage wasn't circulating on fifth generation bootleg videotapes at conventions, and at the very least he'd read Foster's novelization of Alien, because it's the same. It's a very similar scene done with very similar effect, and it's the most horrific. But this is a story where they're often talking about horrific things. There's a scene early on where the morticians are talking, and they're talking about the president's wife's body being taken out of cryo, and they're like, yeah, we don't want to leave it out of cryo too long. I think Joe Bell says, because she's going to start to froth. There's another line where Gregory and Natasha are talking, and it's like, well, if you do this the wrong way, if you defreeze him the wrong way, he's going to liquefy, and then you'll be scooping him out with a ladle. And then obviously the big thing at the end is, Soylent Green is people. Yeah. And wow, a cat. So this is, this is a show that's running at 6:30 on Saturday nights. That's, aimed at kids and a family audience. This is, pretty intense stuff. And this is,
and we also have the mutant attack in the first episode too. That's,
the mutant attack.
The Doctor.
There is a lot of really abjectly horrific content in this season and in this story specifically, and you can really understand, even if you're even if you don't agree with censorship and stuff like that, you do kind of, I at least kind of get what some of the detractors were getting at when they're saying, yeah, this is not really appropriate for the audience that you're aiming it at.
And jumping back to that mutant attack at the beginning, I also think that was an interesting scene because it does it gives something interesting for Perry to do as well, and I do think that Perry, I mean, with so many doctors, I feel like this is another story where, you know, the doctor and his companion almost get a little bit of short shrift. That you know, I feel like in terms of screen time, I would almost say that the doctor is on screen roughly only half the time of the entire episode.
I've read more than one critical assessment of this story and of the Colin Baker era in general, but specifically this story where they say Eric Sayward seems less interested in the Doctor than kind of like the world he's built for the Doctor to explore. What's going on with the Doctor and Perry? More so the Doctor. There's like a couple of things. There's like the bit towards the end of part one where he thinks he's facing his own memorial, his own headstone, and he's like, oh, I've come here after I died, and because it's done in the likeness of Colin Baker, he's like, oh, I'm not going to regenerate anymore. This is my last life. But other than that, the Doctor, he gets a few good lines, but he doesn't really do anything interesting in this story. Perry, I think, Perry is a very interesting case because she's not generally considered to be one of the more successful companions. John Nathan Turner wanted an American character because to replace Tegan and Turlough, because the American convention circuit was really heating up at the time. There was a lot more interest in Doctor Who then in America than there had been. And Perry was kind of like a reaction to that. He wanted American viewers to kind of have okay, here's your entry into this. It's not all people talking in posh accents.
Yeah, and she even had the one scene with the DJ where she's like, "Oh, I thought you were American," and the DJ's like, "No, this is just my put upon accent for because I listen to a lot of American DJs."
So the problem here was that Nicola Bryant, who played Perry, Nicola Bryant is British. That's not her real accent she uses. By this time, she's gotten the American accent down pretty well. It still doesn't sound entirely convincing to me, but part of the problem, there will be periods in classic Doctor Who where they will take the female companion, and the idea of the female companion is basically there is eye candy, and the excuse trotted out for the press is all invariably, quote unquote, for the dads, to give the adult men something to watch while the kids are watching, the monsters and the Doctor. So Nicola Bryant,
and I did notice that was kind of a story element in both Cavers of Androzani and here, because at one point Joe Bill, he captures Perry.
Right.
He spends all of his dialogue talking about how pretty she is.
Yeah, and Nicola Bryant ended up really kind of growing into the role, and by this time I think she actually puts in a really good performance here, I thought, because she's got a couple of interesting things to do. She gets the scene with the mutant, and she gets the scenes with Jobel, where she's fending off Jobel, and particularly, I thought that I really liked the bit where she was evading when he leads her to the DJ's booth, and she's evading him, and she's like, "Oh, I could just love you. And he's like, "I could just love you pieces." And Perry's like, "Yeah, well, I guess you'll love me to death, won't you?" And she just like, just shuts the door and like that. But I think that really kind of plays to kind of her strengths as an actress here. But yeah, the problem is this is one of the stronger stories for her. Unfortunately, the problem is she's just usually written as the bog standard, companion who's just there to look nice, and they were dressing Nicola Bryant, and you don't see this here. Like these really tight like jumpsuits and spandex and stuff like that to emphasize her figure. And that's just, there's a slight joke at the beginning where she's talking about this baggy, shapeless sort of blue parka, and she's talking about it as if it's really tight and uncomfortable. And the thing is, the scripts were originally written so that the color morning on the planet is actually white, and she was wearing the skin-tight white jumpsuit, but they didn't take into account the fact that there would be snow. So that went out the window. So they had to put warmer costumes together for the actors, and also they had to pick a color for that would contrast with the snow. You couldn't have, people in white clothes on white snow. It just didn't look right. It didn't.
Yeah, I also read. I think it's in the wiki for this episode that either the writer or the director, he wanted to have the blue cloak over the Doctor's, because we haven't talked about his costume, which, I mean, Doctor Who fans know his costume very well, but this is like the patchwork Doctor, This is the very colorful, bright patchwork outfit, and in the wiki it said that's part of the reason why they wanted him wearing the blue cloak for at least part of the episode, is that he didn't think that the costume fit with a more dramatic episode.
Right. That friggin' costume. Now on the current show, the actor playing the Doctor picks the costume. The producer, the showrunner, really doesn't have a whole lot of input into how the actor dresses. And this kind of, like, for example, I don't think that any producer would have put together the 13th Doctor, the Jodie Whittaker costume. That's very idiosyncratic, and that's something that really kind of reflects Whittaker's personality. And she even specifically said she kind of wanted her costume to be pieces off the rack so that fans could cosplay her better, and without, laying out a lot of money for kind of like the more formal frock coats and pants and stuff like that Peter Capaldi and Matt Smith wore. But in the classic show and in the TV movie, this was not the case. The producers determined the costume. John Nathan Turner wanted something, because Peter Davison's costume, he wore the cricket uniform with the cricketer uniform with the one kind of concession to eccentricity being the stalk of celery on the lapel. John Nathan Turner wanted to have a contrast to the more understated and low-key Peter Davison, so he decided to do the whole patchwork thing, which Colin Baker hated. Colin Baker absolutely loathed that costume. He is on the record as he fought against it and lost. He wanted to wear – his idea was to largely he wanted to wear like a leather jacket. He wanted to wear like darker clothes. He wanted to wear like black slacks, turtleneck, and black blazer and black or leather jacket. And he basically – he was overruled by saying, no, it's not flamboyant enough. It's not – it doesn't pop enough. We can't do that for the Doctor. And he likes to say, imagine my surprise when the show came back and I saw what Christopher Eccleston was wearing. And there's this great meme that I think I've shared amongst rabbit hole people where they have photoshops of Colin Baker in Eccleston's costume and Eccleston in the patchwork coat. There are a couple of like personal touches that Colin Baker did end up coming up with, like the little cat pin on the lapel. Colin Baker loves cats, so there's always references to kind of like cats in the costume. But yeah, he freaking hated that costume. He just felt that it was too gaudy and too tasteless, and just you couldn't really take him seriously when he's dressed like that.
Yeah, and then with all these interacting stories, we haven't even really talked about the Daleks at all, and that this is kind of the Daleks versus Daleks at the end, where we have the white cream-colored Davros Daleks, and we have the one moment where, which I think looks great, the transparent Dalek, which I got the impression whenever I was watching it is because it's, this is him creating a new Dalek, turning the people into Daleks, that the reason that it was clear was because it's, it's like the chrysalis stage of the Dalek.
Sure. And, behind the scenes, the idea of a transparent or glass Dalek was a very old one. They actually wanted to do a glass Dalek in the very first Doctor Who story in 1963. And obviously, it being 1963, they couldn't achieve it on that budget. It does appear in the novelization of that first serial, the glass Dalek, and I think there had been a couple of other cracks that they try to take at that. But this is where they finally get on screen, and I do agree. I think it looked pretty good for what they were, for the budget that this show was made on. And like I said, this was the Revelation was, budgetarily probably the brunt of the litter. I do think it looks pretty good.
Yeah, and then whenever the darker, the Skaro Daleks come in, and the Skaro Daleks are fighting the Davros Daleks. I kind of like that as well. But that little dichotomy, even though I do think, even though they've kept the spirit of the effects with the Dalek disintegration ray or whatever, their extermination ray, even with the newest series, it's still it's a very similar effect, but it's updated in the new series. But it still just makes me laugh every time anyone gets killed by it.
It's the classic series Dalek extermination effect is where they flip the color on flip the color from negative to positive again. Going all the way back to the first Dalek serial, they do that with the whole picture. They do that with the whole frame, and it's really only starts being localized in 79 with Destiny of the Daleks. This is the last time on the classic show, or indeed ever at all, that we're going to see Dalek extermination effect like that. When you get to Remembrance of the Daleks in a couple of years with Sylvester McCoy, they'll have the sort of X-ray effect where you see the skeleton. And what the extermination effect on the new series is a combination of the two.
Mm-hmm.
It'll have the negative, but you'll also see the skeleton. It'll have that X-ray effect.
Yeah, although it does make me laugh every time, just because it's so silly.
To be honest, with as far as classic Doctor Who effects go, I think it's one of the more, for shooting, apart from good old blanks or electronic ray gun effects, and electronic ray gun effects are always dodgy on Doctor Who, like. You'll have K9 will shoot somebody.
We do get a couple of these. We get a couple of those in this one too. Although it's most of the guns in this episode are kind of the bullet effect. But we do get like one moment with the laser with the pistol. That's the power pack is almost dead, so it doesn't accomplish anything.
But there's, the ray gun effects are always dodgy in the classic series. There are, you get back to the K9 era. K9 will shoot somebody in the knee, and the victim will clutch their stomach, as if that was where they were shot. But yeah, I mean, in terms of its silliness, I mean, look at the original Ice Warriors, where they just basically take like a sheet of Mylar and shake it so that it looks like distortion. It's, it's suck it and see it. It's a very DIY.
But I like the Daleks. I like that, a lot of the characters do get kind of moments to shine. Like even the DJ, he has this, this like concentrated music gun, and he's able to kill a couple Daleks, even though his death is again, it's death by stupidity, because he just walks over to the door and there's two Daleks, and then they kill him.
Yeah, no, he's he's one of the highlights of the show. This is Alexei Sayle, a British stand-up comedian and writer. He is probably best known amongst American audiences for The Young Ones, but for having done the comedy series The Young Ones. But he's I think he puts in. I really love the part where he's explaining the gun to Perry. It's a concentrated beam of rock and roll, and he's like, he's like, constantly moving his hands during that. It killed, and I just think he just adds so much to this. This is, I think the performances in this story are fairly good. You do see like I said, you do see two actors in this who come back to the new show. Now, the interesting thing about this episode was directed by a guy named Graham Harper, who is the only person to direct classic Doctor Who and new Doctor Who. He was brought on in the second season to do the Cyberman, the Return of the Cybermen, the Age of Steel and Rise of the Cybermen. So the guy who plays Lilt Colin Spall, he plays the Weasley Little. He plays I don't remember the guy's name, but the big bad guy. He plays the Weasley Little Droog that ends up turning against him in that story. And then the other actor who shows up in the new show is Clive Swift, who plays Jobel. He's in Voyage of the Damned. I think his character is named like Mr. Hopper or something like that. He's the guy. He does the whole thing where they introduce Wilf Mott. He's the one that takes the people down to Earth and gets all the facts about Earth wrong. But I think I think the only unsuccessful performance here is, I think, Jenny Thomason, who plays Tasm Beaker. I think she's just a little bit too grating and way too over the top. Like the whole thing. Davros is the great healer is ordered me to kill you, and I don't think her character has. I think her performance really drains the pathos. I think you're supposed to. I think you're supposed to sympathize with Tasm Beaker a little bit more than you actually do, because she's just so grating and annoying and hard to kind of really understand.
And she wants to try and save Jobel because she has a crush on him, but Jobel is awful to her because she's not conventionally attractive. So she kills him, and then she immediately gets killed. But, she has 2 minutes to have this speech about how she shouldn't have killed him and she didn't want to. And then the Daleks come and kill her because, she tried to save Jobel. So, but that's like such kind of an unsatisfying end to that arc. And there are definitely some threads, like, you talked about the memorial that the Doctor sees in his name or in his image. And then it just randomly falls over to crush him, but it's a prop and not actual stone, and so
it's very obviously a prop.
Yeah, and then it's like, luckily that was just a prop and it wasn't made of stone. And then it's like they make a brief reference of it whenever he's in front of Davros, but then it's just kind of dropped. They don't explain why Davros created that in his image, especially because whenever the last time that he interacted with Davros, he looked different, so it was a different regeneration. So it doesn't make sense why this version of the Doctor has the memorial. So it's like just such a weird thing, and I believe was the Doctor getting crushed, was that the cliffhanger between the two episodes?
Yes, that was the cliffhanger. And the thing I want to mention about that, the resolution of that scene, is that when he pushes the fake stone off of himself, he's bloodied, and Perry mentions, "Oh, you're bleeding," and the Doctor's like, "Don't worry, it's not mine." But they never explain how he got bloodied. They don't ever say whose blood it is. It's a mystery. I want an answer to that one. Whose blood is that?
Yeah, my impression was that the whole thing was just an effect. Like it was all just set up as as a stage play almost, but they don't explain why it was set up in this way.
Uh-huh. I want to take a moment to discuss, to go back to the Morticians and just do another kind of fun fact here about where Eric Sayward got the Morticians plot from. And this is another kind of thing where we're going to see some of the weird ways in which really unlikely sources come to influence stories. But the plot, the idea of the mortuary comes from a mid-century novel called The Loved One by Evelyn Waugh, who also wrote Brideshead Revisited. Brideshead Revisited was kind of like a big sensation in the States when it was published. MGM flew Evelyn Waugh out to kind of discuss the possibility of them adapting it, which he had no intention of ever allowing them to do because he felt Hollywood would ruin it. But he figured, well, why not just, bum around L.A., a British writer thinking, why not just bum around on L.A. on a studio dime for a while? And he ended up falling in with a group of other British expatriates. And one of the things that came out of that time he spent in L.A. was The Loved One, which is a novel about British expatriates in L.A., one of whom is kind of infatuated with a person who works at a mortuary named Mr. Joyboy, which is where Joe Bell's name comes from. The plot of the novel doesn't really make it into Revelation at all. It really is only the setup of the really fussy, egotistical, head mortician whose name starts with J, who's convinced he's, hot stuff. But that's kind of an interesting thing where you think, yeah, I would never in a million years think like a satirical mid-century slice of life novel about morticians in L.A. would make its way into a Doctor Who script about Daleks.
Yeah, but I think we've covered just about everything. Yeah, one other little part that I did really enjoy was kind of the last, towards the end, because you do have this moment where Orsini, rescues the Doctor and the two grave robbers. Like he just does it, as a distraction, and but the Doctor had already partially freed himself, and so there's like that moment of conflict between the two of them, and they like the Doctor, I think, tries to attack Orsini, but then gets punched, and then Orsini's like explains that he's this knight, and the Doctor's like, if you knew that you were dealing with one of us, then you probably wouldn't have survived. And the Doctor's like, oh, definitely. Like, he kind of shows Orsini some
only
respect.
I would be so dumb as to attack a Knight of Oberon.
Yeah. And then whenever he gets to the end, the two of them are kind of working together, where, they're sharing these looks, and the Doctor slides the pistol over to him, and, I thought those moments were really well done.
Those are, I think, some of the most successful moments of the serial, because the guy playing Orsini, William Gaunt, he plays off of Colin Baker very well. They kind of have this rapport with each other. But the other thing that I kind of want to mention is that these scenes are filmed and edited very well. When they kind of make sure that it's not one of those things where you see like people being surprised by people like out in the open, like this is shit that you should notice. It's like he's very careful to show these things, like of these shots of like Orsini kicking guns under the table when Davros is ranting and facing away from the camera and wouldn't have noticed it. But these kind of low angles, these kind of very subtle glances between William Gaunt and Colin Baker, I think that's really one of the, I think, strongest. Those were really a treat, I think.
Yeah. But we've talked a lot about this serial, but I mean, it is kind of a packed serial. There's so many stories packed into this, and they're all intersecting and interconnected. Do you have anything else to say before we kind of wrap up this episode?
This is I wouldn't say that this is I wouldn't call this serial an unqualified success. I think there are certainly a lot of things about it that don't work. I think really episode 2 is a lot less interesting when the Doctor gets involved and then Daleks come in and start exterminating everybody. I think that's a lot less interesting than the setup you get in episode 1. This really is, on the other hand, one of the more successful serials of the Sixth Doctor's area. I wouldn't say this is quite as a high point as Vengeance on Varos, which is probably the only Colin Baker serial you can say is unqualifiably good, but I still think this is one of the stronger ones. Despite its flaws, I have a lot of affection for this serial. I think it's really neat in a lot of ways, even if there are a few elements that don't really work.
Yeah, and one thing that I have been doing with these classic episodes is I have been ranking them in terms of my enjoyment. So they might get swapped around because I'm not writing these down or anything, but from episode to episode. But I think I still believe that Caves of Androzani is kind of still there at the top. I thought it's been the best. And then I would go, I think Carnival of Monsters is still my number 2. That one was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that one.
I love Carnival of Monsters.
And then I think I would put this one at number 3. I think I did, I enjoyed all the interconnecting storylines. This kind of hits the right buttons for me in terms of the type of story I like. But it is very close between this one and then the next one would be the Time Meddler, because the Time Meddler is a lot of fun too. And in future these might get swapped, depending on my memory. And then Meglos is below that, which I did think that was fun. I enjoyed that one. And then Tomb of Cybermen for me is at the bottom of these classic episodes that I've seen so far.
Tomb is one of those that it's really interesting because it is beloved of a certain kind of Doctor Who fan. But a lot of when it comes to like the critical assessments of the show, like the people who actually approach the show from like a critical perspective, it usually doesn't rank very highly. Miles and Wood, who wrote the About Time books, don't care for it. Elizabeth Sandifer doesn't really care for it. And I think it's something where if you're not familiar with that era, I don't think it's got its charms, but I don't think it's one that's like, if you're going to pick a Patrick Troughton story to do, it's maybe not the best one.
Yeah, I know Stephen Palmer, who was my guest for that episode, he said that it was probably one of his least favorite Troughton episodes. He ranked it very low, but then, Brian Hines, he said that Tomb of the Cybermen is his favorite episode.
And Tomb of the and Brian, I've known Brian for a very long time. Brian will tell you up front his favorite Doctor is Patrick Troughton. And it's like I said, if you're kind of in tune with what the Patrick Troughton era brings, then it's a very good story. But if you're really kind of dodgy about the whole Base Under Siege of the Week format, that the Patrick Troughton era tends to get very samey from a story to story perspective. It's like there's one season where like pretty much every serial is the same basic setup, just with a different monster. Then Tomb of the Cybermen maybe isn't quite so impressive.
Yeah, but I'm looking forward to going to another Dalek episode, next time with Remembrance of the Daleks.
And Remembrance, this is another really good one for you to do, because I think I've told you this off the podcast as well. Remembrance is another very strong contender for the title of Best Classic Doctor Who Story, period, along with Androzani and really, honestly, Carnival of Monsters as well. So you're in for a treat with that one. And you're gonna get a very. I'm not gonna do any spoilers for it. I'm not gonna say anything.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me and coming back again. And
Hey, no problem.
This isn't your last time here on this episode. I'm bringing you back at least once more.
Better not be.
And then for one more time, why don't you take a moment and let people know where else you can be found online?
RabbitHolePodcast.com. Jason Soto and I do predictably a Doctor Who podcast called From Inner Time that we only do it. We only do it when Doctor Who is on the air. So I assume we're going to be getting together in December to do this year's Christmas special, which is going to be entitled Joy to the World, and is written by. This one will not be written by Russell T Davies. It will be written by Stephen Moffat, and it will be Ncuti Gatwa's second Christmas special. And I was pretty happy with Ncuti's first season, and I am really intrigued to see where the story goes from there. And then I often make appearances on other podcasts on and off the Rabbit Hole Network. I just did a couple weeks ago. I was on the Lambcast discussing Megalopolis, the new Francis Ford Coppola. Actually, it's a couple weeks ago from when we're recording this, but I don't think you're going to be releasing this for another couple months, so I may have another Lambcast by then. But anyway, yeah, that's where I am.
And as always, I'm Bubbawheat, and you can find me on all social media where I'm at Bubbawheat. I also have a couple podcasts over on the Rabbit Hole Network as well. I have completed my Fight Club minutes where I went through the movie Fight Club 1 minute at a time. And I'm also still doing Lyrical Innuendo, where every other Friday I discuss a song and dig into the lyrics and find out if they're actually about sex, drugs, or rock and roll. And if you'd like to have discussions about these episodes as they come out, or have discussions about time loops, so we also have a Facebook group that you can join and be a member of our community. It's Time to Rewind, a time loop group, and you can join that. We'd love to have more people there. And until next time, smoke me a kipper, and I'll regenerate before breakfast next week.